what do you do here in Ojai to kind of mitigate against fire, drought, pests?
Well, fire, there's not much you can do. I mean, if you have a fire...
The Thomas fire was very close, right?
Right, yeah, it came within a few hundred yards of our property.
Oh,
when we left, I thought, well, we're going to be living in a tent for the next couple of years.
That was 2017?
2017.
Yeah.
The only good aspect of the Thomas fire is that it happened in December after we were done with the harvest, so it had no effect on the wines we made. In our little vineyard that we have here, you know, we've planted these 4 varietals that are new varietals bred by Andy Walker at UC Davis that are resistant to Pierce's disease, which is an endemic disease basically in Southern California, and it's a disease that is spreading as the climate warms, but it's a particular problem here when you get down south of Point Conception.
Right.
We had a vineyard that I planted in '81, and we lost that and pulled it out in '95. And then
95 is that one, yeah.
And then and so when Andy came up with these grapes, we decided to plant them. He was able to provide me with young plants directly from the university. By then, 2017, I had a clear idea of what I thought an ideal vineyard might be. But one big thing was to have the rows very close to each other. The original plantings in Santa Barbara County were planted 12 feet apart so that large tractors could go up and down the rows. Mm-hmm. The problem with the very wide spacing is you have a lot of light on those vines, and then as you pull the spacing closer and closer, the rows actually provide shade for the next row. And so we chose to do it, have our spacing at 5.5 feet. At midday, all the sun is going directly down, hitting the ground. Right. But then you just get a couple hours later or before, and the sun is filtered through the vines, and so the dirt doesn't get quite as hot. There's more shading on the fruit as well. And so I think that's to me, it's super beneficial. Our little vineyard here, we've had almost, despite having some insane years because of climate warming, we've had almost no sunburn or raisening problems here, and that's quite the thing.
And when did you plant those hybrids?
17.
So in 17.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. First crop 19.
Yeah. And what do you think of them?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. So the way they were made is, they took Vitis vinifera and then they crossed it with Vitis arizonica, which carries the resistance. But then they back-crossed again and again until they got to 97% vinifera. But the issue is when you cross, whatever, Cabernet Sauvignon with something else, Zinfandel or whatever, you don't get just sort of like half of this and half of that. You get something completely different. If you look at the parents of Syrah or look at the parents of Pinot Noir, they're varietals that, nobody knows what they are for a
Syrah,
reason.
Dureza and Mondus Blanche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so actually 2 of the varieties we have, the 2 whites, they're like 3/4 or more red grape varieties, primarily Cabernet Sauvignon. Yeah. And yet they're green grapes.
Huh. Yeah, crazy.
And so you get something completely new and different. And so it's a lot like working with, these days, people are fascinated by ancient varieties that they're finding a few vines here or there out in the middle of nowhere, throughout Europe, Italy and Spain in particular.
Yeah, look at what Slashy's doing up in the Santa Rita Hills with growing things from seed and.
Oh, yeah.
That may be a different thing, but
that's a little bit of a different thing.
Yeah.
In Europe, people have been rediscovering old varieties that are. They all have their peculiarities. They all have, they have their strengths and weaknesses, how they grow, how they produce fruit, the kinds of wines they make. And so for me, these are just 4 more interesting varieties of that sort. But I feel like that Andy made some really great selections. The wines are quite interesting. They've been a success. We're selling mostly directly to our customers.
Cool.
Which is, people aren't going to go to the grocery store and buy Paseante Noir. And the wines are good, and they're unique and interesting.
Do you do anything different winemaking wise with them?
The learning curve is, it's so slow. I mean, just if you take on a new vineyard and say a new variety, I mean, you don't necessarily get it right the first time. It might take you 8 years to really figure it out. And so yeah, I've tried to learn as fast as I can to adapt to what we have. And so for instance, the primary red that we're making is called Paseante Noir. It grows excessively vigorously, and so that has to be worked on in the vineyard. It produces too much crop, and so we have to thin the crop a lot.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, it is a good problem. In the winery, it's a pretty tannic variety, and so I do the fermentation and aging completely without SO2 all the way up until bottling, and the bottling we added a little touch of SO2. And what that's done for me is the wine softens because there's no SO2 to bind up oxygen, and so it softens a lot more than in the presence of sulfur dioxide, so yeah, we are treating it a very kind of different sort of way.
How are they like acid pH balance wise? Are they similar to vinifera that you work
very
with
much
from the same climates? And
acidity is not their strong point, and so that's sort of too bad. They're maybe adapted better for a slightly cooler climate than here.
And speaking of cooler climate, Ciega, your property up in the Santa Rita Hills, you've planted some of these there, right?
Ciega is a vineyard that originally was planted by Rick Longoria, although the property was not owned by him. And then I've been making wine there since 2003. I think at your 50th birthday party, Rick talked to me about it. And so I said, no, I don't want any Pinot Noir. And so I went up there and saw the site, and it was a beautiful site, so I had to buy fruit. But anyway, up there, besides Pinot Noir, that's what's mostly planted there, Rick planted some Chardonnay down really off the mesa, down right by the San Ynez River. And unfortunately, that got Pierce's disease right away.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Right.
Like just within a few years.
Wow.
And at that short distance, I mean, it's quite a distance, but it made a difference. So I immediately thought, well, we should just plant these varieties. And so we planted mostly Paseante Noir, which I like a lot. And then we planted just, single rows of the other 3 varieties that we have here.
And do you have plans for more planting there?
Not right now. Yeah. I mean, it's very costly to plant grapes.
Yeah.
So at Ciega, pulled out 1 acre of Pinot Noir that was very non-productive, and then planted 1.3 acres of Chardonnay and 1.1 acres of Syrah.
Cool.
And then the Paseante Noir, about 0.6 of an acre of Paseante Noir. And so what's fun is that it makes a completely different wine up there. Climate really is a huge difference. The acidity is a little bit better, but not dramatically, because it hangs out there so long, it takes so long for it to ripen. But the characters some of the fruit characters are similar, but it shows in a completely different way. It doesn't have that very strong tannins that we have here.
Do you feel that climate change has affected the vineyards more here than in Santa Rita Hills, or what's your feeling about that? How climate change has affected the 2 different climate zones that you're working with?
That's a good question.
Yeah, probably one that's a little long for tonight.
Yeah, but I would say the problem is here it's always Ojai is warm, it's hot,
right,
and so I think actually there's been greater change in the northern Santa Barbara County area
in terms of the percentage of change.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we just the acidity levels aren't quite what they were.
Right. Right.
And you sort of expect them to be, but they aren't.
Yeah.
And that's part of the
No, we just at Biennacido we've been harvesting. I mean, not every year, but overall earlier.
Right.
Yeah.